For 40 years, humanity lived just one button away from total destruction. The Cold War was not merely a political standoff, it was a nuclear arms race that placed the entire world on the brink. Imagine a world where fear did not come from distant battlefields, but from an invisible threat. A small button hidden in underground bunkers that, if pressed, could wipe out not just a city, but the entire planet. This was the reality millions of people faced during the Cold War. After 1945, when the first atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the world was changed forever. For the first time in history, humankind possessed the power to erase itself in minutes. The United States stood as the sole possessor of this ultimate weapon, but not for long. Just 4 years later, the Soviet Union detonated its own atomic bomb. From that moment, the deadliest race in human history began. Who could build more, bigger, and deadlier weapons? But the arms race was not only about rockets, missiles, or secret laboratories. It seeped into everyday life. In America, children crouched under wooden desks during duck-and-cover drills, pretending those flimsy shields could save them from blasts hotter than the sun. In Soviet cities, parades of massive missiles rolled through the streets, symbols of pride but also grim reminders of how fragile peace had become. Fear became part of daily existence. Families dug bunkers in their backyards. Media spread doomsday scenarios through propaganda films. Even popular culture was filled with visions of post-apocalyptic worlds. For an entire generation, the doomsday clock wasn't just a metaphor. It was a constant ticking anxiety. Imagine going to sleep every night with the thought that tomorrow morning might never come, not because of nature, but because two superpowers had decided to press the wrong button. For 40 years, this was the shadow that loomed over humanity. And within that fear lay a chilling irony. Leaders claimed that nuclear weapons existed to preserve peace, that the threat of total destruction actually prevented another great war. This doctrine was called mutually assured destruction, or MAD. And yes, the acronym was no coincidence. Peace sustained not by hope, but by terror. During the Cold War, the world balanced on a razor's edge. One miscommunication, one faulty radar, one impulsive decision could have triggered the end of civilization. This was the paradox of the age, an era where humans reached for the stars, walked on the moon, and made extraordinary scientific breakthroughs, while also constructing the most destructive machines ever conceived. For 40 years, humanity lived under constant fear. For 40 years, the world existed just one button away from Armageddon. The Cold War may be over, but its legacy endures. Thousands of nuclear warheads remain locked away in underground silos, waiting for orders we hope will never come. This is not just a story of politics. It is a story of human lives, of fear, of uncertainty, and of the fragile hope that endured beneath the shadow of annihilation. And this is a story of how, for decades, humanity lived on the edge of destruction. In 1945, the world witnessed a weapon of unimaginable power. The United States held the nuclear monopoly, but it would not last. By 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb, igniting an arms race that would define the next half-century. August 1945. Two cities in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were wiped out in an instant. The world stood in shock. For the first time, humanity saw what happened when science, technology, and war converged into one. An explosion hot enough to melt steel, strong enough to flatten entire neighborhoods, and deadly enough to kill tens of thousands of people in seconds. The atomic bomb was not just a weapon, it was the dawn of a new era, the nuclear age. At that moment, the United States stood as the sole possessor of this terrifying power. With the atomic bomb, they held a monopoly unlike anything in history. But beneath that sense of supremacy lay a question. How long could they keep it? The answer came sooner than expected. Behind the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union was racing against time. Through a network of spies, Soviet scientists gained access to secrets from the Manhattan Project, the classified American program that created the first bomb. Armed with determination and massive resources, they closed the gap. On August 29, 1949, in the desolate steppes of Kazakhstan, a blinding flash lit up the sky. The Soviet Union had detonated its first atomic bomb. The monopoly was broken. The balance of power shifted overnight. The world was no longer in the hands of one nation. It was now divided between two nuclear giants. For many, this was terrifying news. If one bomb could level a city, what would happen if two superpowers faced off with hundreds or thousands of such weapons? But for leaders on both sides, it was not only about fear, it was about prestige, power, and ideology. For the United States, nuclear weapons became a shield against communism. For the Soviets, the bomb was proof that they would never bow to Western dominance. Thus began the most dangerous race in human history. Not just about who had more bombs, but who could build bigger ones, deadlier ones, weapons capable of unimaginable destruction. From this moment, the world entered the age of the nuclear arms race. And with every weapon built, fear grew. The world began to realize this was no longer just a rivalry between two nations. It was a threat to all humanity. 1945 marked the birth of the bomb. 1949 ended the monopoly. And together, they set the stage for 4 decades of fear that would shape the course of history.
The doctrine was simple and terrifying. If one side launched nuclear war, the other would respond with total annihilation. This was mutually assured destruction, MAD. Ordinary families built bomb shelters in their backyards, school children practiced nuclear drills, and the world lived under the shadow of fear. The 1950s and 60s marked the height of nuclear logic taken to its most insane extreme. Both the United States and the Soviet Union knew that traditional armies and tanks no longer determined victory. What mattered now were weapons that could erase entire cities in seconds, nuclear bombs. This gave birth to the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD. The principle was chillingly simple. If one nation launched a nuclear strike, the other would retaliate with full force. The result? Both sides destroyed, along with the rest of the world. It was the terrifying paradox of the 20th century. Nuclear weapons existed not to be used in war, but to prevent war. The logic was that since everyone knew nuclear war meant the end of everything, no one would dare to fire the first shot. But for ordinary people, that logic brought no comfort. In America, families dug underground bunkers in their backyards, stocked with canned food, water, and survival gear, as if preparing for the apocalypse. Children were taught duck and cover drills in schools, crouching under desks, covering their heads with their hands, pretending that could shield them from the fiery blast of an atomic bomb. In the Soviet Union, propaganda painted America as the eternal threat, urging citizens to remain vigilant against imperialist aggression. On both sides, fear was turned into a political tool. Governments sold the illusion of safety by building weapons that could wipe humanity off the map. The media amplified the dread. Films, posters, and news broadcasts showed terrifying visions of a nuclear attack. Fear became woven into everyday life. Everyone knew there was no safe place. War could begin at any moment with the push of a single button. And even more dangerously, the stockpiles grew. By the early 1960s, nuclear warheads numbered in the thousands. The US developed intercontinental ballistic missiles, the Soviets built long-range rockets, submarines carried nuclear weapons beneath the seas, and strategic bombers patrolled the skies. The world was essentially sitting on a ticking bomb timer. Everyone understood that if a single mistake was made, if one radar misread a signal, if one leader lost his patience, the result would be global annihilation. And yet, in a twisted sense, MAD created a strange kind of stability. Because both sides feared a total destruction, a large-scale war never happened. But this was not peace. It was a stability built on terror, paranoia, and the looming specter of nuclear apocalypse. This was life in the 1950s and 60s, a world where the future of humanity rested on weapons never used but always feared.
In October 1962, the world came closest to nuclear war. Soviet missiles in Cuba, American warships on blockade, leaders under immense pressure. For 13 days, humanity stood on the edge of Armageddon before a fragile deal pulled us back from the brink. 1962 was the most dangerous moment in the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the time when the world truly held its breath. It began when the Soviet Union secretly deployed nuclear-armed ballistic missiles to Cuba, a small island just 90 miles from Florida. For the United States, this was an intolerable threat. Imagine weapons capable of destroying Washington or New York within minutes, placed right at America's doorstep. When aerial photographs from U-2 spy planes revealed the missile sites, President John F. Kennedy faced the greatest dilemma of his life. Should he strike Cuba and risk a war with the Soviet Union, or wait, risking those missiles becoming operational and ready to target American cities? Kennedy chose a middle path. He announced a naval quarantine, blocking Soviet ships from bringing additional missiles to Cuba. The world watched as American warships confronted Soviet vessels across the Atlantic. One miscalculation, one trigger pull, could have unleashed global nuclear war. For 13 tense days, humanity stood on the edge of Armageddon, before a fragile deal pulled us back from the brink. Ordinary people felt the fear deeply. In the US, families stocked up on supplies. Children still practiced duck and cover drills, but this time the fear was real, not just a classroom exercise. In Cuba, citizens braced for invasion, with soldiers stationed on every street. It seemed the world was waiting for an inevitable explosion. Yet, behind the scenes, diplomacy worked frantically. Through secret messages, Kennedy and Khrushchev negotiated. After days of brinkmanship, a fragile deal was struck. The Soviet Union would withdraw its missiles from Cuba, and the United States pledged not to invade the island. Quietly, Washington also agreed to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, though this part was kept from the public at the time. With that, the world slowly stepped back from the edge. The Cuban Missile Crisis became a moment when humanity nearly destroyed itself, but also when fragile diplomacy proved stronger than the deadliest weapons. In the aftermath, a direct hotline between Washington and Moscow was established, so leaders could communicate instantly in times of crisis, avoiding the deadly delays of the past. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains a chilling reminder. The world can come within seconds of ending. Yet even on the brink, reason, thin and fragile, can still pull humanity back.
When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the nuclear arms race slowed, but never truly ended. Thousands of warheads still remain today, reminders of how close humanity once came to annihilation. The Cold War arms race was not just a contest of power, it was a test of survival. And the lesson remains, as long as these weapons exist, so does the shadow of destruction. The fall of the Soviet Union was more than the end of a superpower. It was the closing chapter of an era that had defined the 20th century. The world watched as symbols crumbled, the Berlin Wall torn down, the START Treaty signed, nuclear stockpiles slowly dismantled. Yet the truth is sobering. Even as the Cold War ended, its nuclear legacy did not simply vanish. In the early 1990s, more than 60,000 nuclear warheads still existed worldwide, enough to destroy the planet many times over. For ordinary people, the end of the Cold War felt like a relief. Children no longer practiced hiding under desks in school drills. Air raid sirens no longer haunted daily life. For the first time in decades, the world seemed to breathe easier. But the relief was never complete. The weapons remained. They moved from silos to storage depots, from one nation's control to another's, sometimes even slipping into dangerous uncertainty. The greatest lesson of this era is clear. A power capable of ending the world never truly disappears. The shadow of annihilation lingers as long as nuclear weapons exist. The story of the nuclear arms race is one of human ambition, fear, ingenuity, and folly. But it is also a story of sheer luck that, despite countless crises and near misses, the world never burned. And that is the final message of the 20th century. As long as nuclear weapons exist, humanity will always live just one button, one decision away from the end.